Thank you very much. I'd like to speak without microphone, but if you need, please tell me, and I will use it. Thank you very much, Bob, for this kind invitation. Thank you very much for the organizer for this invitation. It's a real pleasure for me to be here and to present you quite an unusual project. Today it's more than project, it's a real job. We are starting 3 years ago, which is called Chronospedia, like as encyclopedia for the time. As you understand myself, I'm very far from the horology activity. Of course, I am teaching in university and my teaching is related to the relativity, to the time, but in fact, nothing in common with the activity which I'd like to present today. But there is an important point why I'm interested and why I started this project 3 years ago. It is the project which is strongly based on different innovation technologies. And for university professors, it's very important to use and to test different technologies in the teaching. And it is the point why I decided to participate to this project. So I'd like to explain you why we create Chronospedia. Let's say today, in fact, it happened 3 years ago. And the most important point was the use of the 3D technologies, which appeared a few tens years ago, but nevertheless it became more and more popular in industry, mostly in industry, in scientific activity, and more in teaching. And we will see how this technology can help us to understand better how the thing works, to explain and to transmit for further generations. It is very important point which I like to emphasize. And I'll show you some main obstacles which we had to overcome, and practically we solved all the problems which met. I will say a few words about our collaborations. Our collaboration with is completely open, and any person who wants to collaborate with us on this project is very welcome. And you will see that our collaboration is quite wide, and it'll cover people coming from very different horizons. Maybe I will say a few words about future possible developments, which are very important from the methodological point of view. For me, the starting point was a chance to meet a person. You see a photo here, which is called Simon-Fustier, which is the clockmaker, one of the few dozen clockmakers who are still alive in France. Unfortunately, they are disappearing due to age, due to absence of activity. And he is the clockmaker in the 4th generation. You can see his grandfather or father here. And another particular point of this person is that he's the only clockmaker in France who has the honorific title given by the Ministry of the Culture, which is called Master of Art. It's quite rare distinguishing title, which recognize the important contribution for the culture. And in French culture, for me as a Russian from the origin, it was really discovered how the horology is important in French culture. And this distinguishing title is very important and allows us to work with different structures, both in higher education and horology, in culture, museums, etc. There is an important point which I'd like to emphasize, that during his career, François Simon-Fustier spent some time in industry. In modern industry of the production and distribution of the time, and for him it was the moment when he discovered new tools, new skills, which can be used for these very old activities. In particular, all approaches related to the engineering process or to innovation. And the important point of innovation for him was the discovery of the 3D software and 3D techniques. And in his activity, he uses these approaches in quite an important way. Roughly speaking, he restores rare object, and before to restore very old clock, he creates a numerical twin in the computer. He restores the numerical twin, and once he's sure that it will work, he returns and he restores the real object. And of course, it was very tiresome. It takes a lot of time, but it's a very good way to be sure that there will be no mistake, or at least the mistakes will be not so important. And when we started to discuss with Francois 3 years ago, he said me that the most problem in France, it's not exactly the same situation in England, but at least in France, that there is no more teaching in antiquarian horology. Clock domestics, clock tower clocks, this kind of teaching is completely disappeared. The explanation is very simple. There is no market, there is no industrial activity. So the young people who comes to the special schools continue to learn how to work with watches, but never with clocks. And there is another phenomenon related to aging and physical disappearance of the clockmakers, and there is no students who wants to work with clocks. So the real forces are disappearing now in France. Another more technical problem is the absence of technical structure documentation on the clockmakers. If we do nothing, in a few years, we will speak about the archaeology of clocks. So to avoid this situation, we want to do something to save these knowledge, these know-how, once more extremely important from cultural point of view, in France. And we decided to use the fact that Francois knew to transcript the knowledge on the clockmakings in 3D models. Once you have 3D models, you translate something in the informatics domain. And in informatics, you can conserve the object. It was the first idea which we had. But before, to show you how it works, how we constructed this project, I'd like to show you some first realization which Francois did during his career. Maybe the first and most interesting model was the model of the horizontal clock, which is presented in Encyclopedia of Diderot and D'Alembert. You see the figures from this encyclopedia. And what is interesting point that you have the figures, but this clock never existed. And when Francois wanted to reproduce and to produce 3D model from the encyclopedia, he found there were some errors. The number of clocks was wrong, the position of the axis was not good, etc. And by 3D techniques, he reconstructed the clock. I will not show you here the whole video, but you can see how this movement works, and it was very important discovery for him that 3D technologies is a real advantage to understand how it works, to analyze, and to see how you can progress. Afterwards, he started to collaborate with different museums in France who asked him to produce for visitors different illustrations. And see you here an example of the cylinder escapement and the model of the most important part. It is the video produced starting from the 3D model. And you see the real difference between the usual video, which you can film starting from the object, and the video created starting from the 3D model. When you have a 3D model, you can take apart to continue to move, to emphasize one part of the model, to add things, to subtract things. It's a really very powerful way to see and to explain how it works. And for me, as a teacher in the university, is a very interesting tool to use in our teaching. And you can see that 3D is a real advantage with respect to usual video and with respect to any textbook. Once more, there is no words. It is an international language. You need no translation. You understand how it works. Another example was a special video produced from one of the most French castles, which is called Vaux-le-Vicomte. It was the castle constructed just before Versailles, when the owner of the castle asked Francois to produce in 1 minute the whole explanation how the system from bells up to deal, passing through the horological mechanism, works in the castle. Once more, it is better that I say nothing and you just to see how it works. For me, who know nothing in horology, it was a real discovery to see how the 3D can explain easily the most important elements only in a few minutes. And then you can stop, you can go everywhere you want. Just before the COVID crisis, Francois started to use, I will return maybe to this story a little bit later. I'd like to show you another example of the model which Francois produced in Portugal for the biggest clocks which existed in the world. You can see Francois inside the clock during the restoration. The smallest element is around 200 pounds. It's extremely heavy. And you can see the model which was creating. Francois spent 18 months to produce this model, but he produced the model and the set of operations which allows to the people who are working in the museum to mount and dismount the clock if they want to repair, and it's better to avoid any error, because if you forget one element, you have to return and to start from the beginning. Once more, you do not need any language. He worked with the Portugal workers, but they spoke in the video language. And you can see really how these kind of approaches is powerful in terms of an explanation, understanding, and to follow different operations. It is one of the ways to visualize the 3D model. Once more, I will show you other examples. Once you produce the 3D model, starting from the 3D model, you can create a video, you can create so-called viewer, I will show you in the 15 minutes, or other object, in particular in the 3D glasses. And after these elements produced for the National Palace of Mafra in Portugal, Francois started to use, we will go a little bit farther, another techniques related to the different movements and the representation in the 3D glasses. I leave you to see the film produced from the 3D model, and you see that you can write any scenario you want. You can go everywhere you want to see any part of this movement and explain how it works. And it was the experiments with the 3D glasses. In fact, 3D glasses are here. So if you have some time, you can go to the craft room, and I will show you this biggest clock in the Portugal. So you can go to Portugal quite easily in few minutes and to be inside this clock. The problem that these experiments, which Francois started in the beginning of the 20s, happens at the moment of the COVID disease, so people weren't very confident in use of the 3D glasses, and we were obliged to change the techniques of the presentation. Today it's no more problems, so 3D glasses are returning and becomes more and more popular, and especially in terms of the price, because the prices of the 3D glasses decreases quite rapidly. So Ben Francois asked me, is it possible to save our knowledge in some way? I found the idea, which was quite simple for me as a teacher in university, because today we are living in the period of the strong evolution of the activities of our libraries, especially in exact sciences. In the exact sciences, there is no more, or practically no more books, textbooks, or articles. Everything happens in the electronic way, and concerning the experimental data, they have to be saved in the different way. And our scientific libraries are starting to work and to store other things than books and textbooks. So I asked the director of our library, is it interesting to create a collection of the informatic objects, which are the 3D models, and to store them in the library? And I had an immediate positive answer. It's very interesting because it is a future for the libraries. The question which we ask ourselves, how many models do we need to describe the history of different clocks of a different horology? You know that the number of the clocks produced during the history is enormous. It's accounted in the millions. But in fact, even the number of the clocks is enormous, the number of the different movements is quite limited. And when we started to visit the different museums in France, different places in France, we discovered that in different places in France, you have different kind of the movements. For instance, come to us near Besançon, where we met with Bob. And at the same time, you have quite frequently a museum devoted to this kind of the movement. Exactly the same situation with another movement which is called Saint-Nicolas d'Aliermont, or other movements in France, or even in Swiss, because we started collaboration from the beginning with our Swiss colleagues from the Neuchâtel, with the biggest museum in the world in horology, International Museum of Horology. Very nice. If you have an opportunity to go there, I want you strongly. And so we understood that it's not necessary to create an infinite number of the models. If you want to explain the main ideas, it's enough to create, let's to say 20, maybe 30 principal models, principal mechanisms to explain the most important point. Of course, there are some historical clocks which you can modelize, but it's another story. If you find money to do these, you can do it. But from the point of view of the number of models, we know that if we have 20, 30 principal model, we can cover an important part of the history, at least in France or in Europe. Today, we progressed quite rapidly, and I'd like to show you our technical website. For the moment is only in French. It appears a few months ago, and its organization is quite simple. We want firstly to explain how the clock works with different elements, and then, depending on the different types of the movements, explain for each kind of movements what can be put inside and how it works. I propose you to skip from the slides and to go directly to the website, which you can download easily here. And in this website, you can see today some models as an example. Only a few models. For instance, Broca movement. And you can see that you can interact easily with this object. It's a very interesting way to visualize three-dimensional objects. It's not a video, it's not a photo, it's so-called viewer. It's a special program which was initially created by Smithsonian Foundation in Washington to visualize historical three-dimensional objects. And today, this technology, which even didn't exist 5 years ago, is very powerful, and you can use it at home. I will return to website to choose another model. Here with the like this one. Here on the website in the computer, you can only manipulate these objects, but if you use your smartphone or iPhone as a particular case, you can put these objects in the augmented reality, to put here in the table. So I invite you to take your iPhone, to put the address of the site chronospedia.com, and you can use this model as you want. Once more, it is free, it's open for everybody. I'd like you to show maybe one model more, because it is very interesting model. You see 3D object in movement. It's once more, it's not a video. It's a viewer and an object which works. This kind of a technology didn't exist, as I said you, a few years ago. But the developments are extremely rapid, and we know that in the nearest future there will be very many new interesting developments. So if I return to our website, as an illustration you can see an example of the use of the three-dimensional model through video. And here you have an example which was developed for Toulouse Museum, one of the most interesting horology. It's a video produced starting from the 3D model. It's not a photo of an object. The object exists in the Toulouse Museum, but you can see how important. This particular clock is interesting because the person who created this clock a few years later created astronomical clock in the Strasbourg Cathedral. And you can see how the techniques of the 3D is powerful to understand, to go inside, to see everything you want. And once more, yourself, you can stop, you can go in a different part of this clock. I prefer even to say nothing and just to leave you to see these images, which seems to be quite fantastic. Of course, it was a little bit expensive. To produce this model, one spent $30,000 a few years ago. Today, we succeed to divide the price by a factor of 3, and I think in the nearest future, we can be able to divide once more the price of the production of the model. The price of the production is important if you want to cover more and more examples and to go to more and more interesting objects. I will stop this video and to show you how the chapters will be organized. For instance, for the comptoise, there will be in each chapter the models, so-called viewers, visionneurs, the animation, the video, the bibliography. We are working with the museum, so there will be the archives of the museums. And we started this experiment with the sounds. In horology, sounds are very important, and we want to store the sounds of the different clocks. I will return to my presentation and to say a few words about the organization, of the project, which is a little bit my specialty. Today, the project is organized in 3 major directions. The first one, devoted to numerical tools, is the way to produce the future encyclopedia, numerical encyclopedia. They are subjects related to the 3D, to the virtual reality, to augmented reality, but there is another very important point, not trivial point, how to produce an archive, how to create library. It's a quite easy thing, everybody knows. You know the name of the author, the title of the book, eventually price of the book, the year of production, and a few words about the content of the book. How to describe the 3-dimensional model? What are the important information? It is an open question, and our project is the first project in the world which represents a collection of the 3D models in motion. And from this point of view, as you will see, there are a lot of scientists who are interested in our project because they can test their procedures with the clocks. They are not really interested by the clocks, but to have this collection is very important for them. It is the first, I would say, very technical part of the project. How to produce the model, what is the best way to produce, how to operate, and how to archive, conserve them, and for what time. It is another not trivial problem, because if you create a model with the software, today's software, nobody can guarantee that the software will work in 10 years, in 20 years, or in 30 years. And our job is to find a solution, the format of the files which allows to do it, and to be sure that there is a place where these data will be stored. And now we have the guarantee that at least for the 3 decades, we have this possibility. 2 weeks ago, we had a confirmation from a very important big European project which wants to store the information concerning the history and the culture for centuries. So we are quite confident that the information which we have created will be conserved for decades, maybe for centuries, which is extremely important. Another important thing for us is how to produce the content. Of course, the main basis is the 3D models, but we want to add other information. For instance, museum inventories, technical and historical documents, or, as I taught previously, sounds of the clocks. And it's very interesting to produce the database which cover extremely heterogeneous object. It's not only the books. In the same library, you have to store models, inventories coming from different museums, from different logics, technical, historical document, and sounds. It's very interesting things. And of course, we do not want only to produce, we want to use. We want to use this for teaching, for restoration, for our collaboration with museums, and with, of course, different communication, maybe production of films. We discussed now some project related to this. Maybe a few words quite rapidly about our collaborations. Of course, there is a very important contribution coming from horology community. Museums, clockmakers, unfortunately quite rare in France now, associations. An important part comes from the higher education and research. And I explained you why in the university, in scientific laboratory, people are very interested by this project. Because it's the first place where then they can test their approaches, their techniques. It's not horology itself, it's only the way to test different way, including artificial intelligence. And of course, the secondary education, we want that these methods, this approach will be used by our future generation. Maybe once more, a very important point, and it was not evident from the beginning. How to find money for this project. And the first idea which comes, you produce something you want to sell. And we decided to do in an opposite way. We will open the project. Everything which we produce is open for everybody. And any person who wants to work with us is very welcome. But when the person comes, he works with us, which allows to obtain more money with different other projects and to work quite rapidly. Sorry, I was too rapid. Quite frequently, one asks me the question why we started by clocks and not by watches. First of all, it was a specialty of François Simon-Fustier. In fact, this part is most written in France, so it's a really urgent thing to do. And there is another quite important point. There is no problems with intellectual property. When you want to create the model of the watch, you will spend a lot of time to discuss with Rolex or somebody else about your right to use this model. The movements of the 19th, 18th century represent no interest from the point of view of intellectual property, so we can go quite rapidly. Clock models are generally more simple, so we can go more rapidly. But in principle, the methodology which we are developing can be applied to any mechanical, electric, any industrial object. We are speaking about clocks, but in fact, you can do everything you want. Today, we are collaborating with, I would say, dozens of museums. Most of them, of course, are on the French-Swiss border, where the horological activity was the most important. There are a few museums near Paris on the north side of France, and very interesting museum in Toulouse, which we start to collaborate. I'd like to show a very small example, which we made last year with a very small museum, which had only one clock. But the mayor of this town was a very interesting person who helped us to find money to produce the model, so we worked with the museum. It was the clock in the initial state in the church of this town, which was restored. It happens that it works, and you can see that the clock is working without any problem. And starting from this clock, we created a model which is injected and projected in another way to visualize the three-dimensional models, so-called showcase. So I will not explain in details of possible collaboration, but just rapidly, you have the institutions which are related to the archiving processes in science, in university activity, a lot of scientific activity about different way to visualize the object. And for instance, in this laboratory, we are creating now a 3 meters room when you can be inside a clock and to mount and dismount it in three-dimensional way, and different activity related to the visualization. We have an important activity, important collaboration with education, with vocational schools, with young guys who want to become an engineer or technician, and who produce us a lot of models as an exercise for them, and they can use the best informatics tools for this activity, but also with the engineering schools who are interested in the 3D models and to virtual reality in their activity. Maybe a few words about money. Unfortunately, for this problem, you have to find money. It's not free of charge. It's quite expensive. But we are strongly supported by French Ministry of the Culture to see in this approach another way to save cultural and industrial objects, very important for the country. We obtained a special money from French national program of archiving, and maybe the most important contribution, and absolutely unusual contribution, came from the industry, from the Dassault system industry. Dassault is the owner of the software which I use, and his historical activity is the production of the military planes. And they give us for 5 years all informatical tools for free, and formally the annual price for all these tools is of the order of $500,000 per year. It's quite important sum for us, but for them it's an important contribution to show to French government how they support French culture. And for them it's very interesting to collaborate with us, because we propose them a lot of interest in the exercises. And for us it was a real way to accelerate the production. Maybe a few words about archiving. It's not so interesting for you, but for us it's very important that we have a special tool which allows us to create the general library, which covers all kinds of the object, and you can use very simple search engine like Google-like engine to find everything you want. It's became really very powerful tool. And as I said you a few minutes ago, now we are sure that our database will be conserved for a few decades, maybe for the century. Maybe a few words concerning visualization. We saw with you so-called viewers the glasses which I can show you in the room after the lectures. There is another way to visualize three-dimensional models, which is so-called hologram showcase. There is nothing in common with hologram, but it calls hologram showcase. When you can see the three-dimensional models, it's quite voluminous. I had no forces to bring it here, but you saw it's in Besançon. In museums likes very well these kind of tools to present activity. So I have to conclude, I think, the end of my presentation. Today our project has succeeded in proof of the concept. We had a lot of technical, important problems to solve, and we have solved these problems, so we are very confident that the final product will be useful, we hope so. And the fact that it's an open access, any person who wants to collaborate is very welcome to do that, allows us to be sure that it will be useful for a lot of people. Today we are in the period of quite a massive production of the three-dimensional models. It depends on the clocks, it depends on the situation, but today we can do a lot of things quite rapidly. And as I told, it offers an excellent field of experiments for our partners. And maybe a few words why I'm very happy to be here. I hope that we can start our collaboration with you. We will be very happy. We are looking for different contribution. We would be very happy to have high quality translation to English of our information. It's very important for us. We are very interested in other interesting historical movement. We had a very brief exchange last year with Bob, who sent us St. Thomas movement. He was modelized in 2 weeks. So you can use on the Chronospedia page St. Thomas movement itself and in box. And of course, we will be very happy to collaborate to any person, in particular with education in the museum here in the United States. So everybody who wants to work with us is very welcome. Thank you very much.